So I'm just going to go through the slides. I tried doing this like full screen and it doesn't work very well. So we'll just look at them individually. So what have I been telling people? I've been telling people that the next release of HDF5 is going to be 116.0. And the reason for this, for having a major release instead of 114.6, is really just to get complex number support out without making older versions of 114 misbehave when they encounter complex numbers. Because we had to change some internal things that, yeah, even though the API, under the hood isn't changing in a way that would require it, it's a visible semantic change. You would see it. Um, so I said, we'll minimize breaking changes. So upgrading from 114 will be as easy as possible with the idea that this is basically 114.6 with complex numbers, right? That was the semantic idea that I was pushing out there was that. And so this was the release schedule at the time, right? I said, look, well, I penciled in 116 because I wanted to get this out maybe in January, because complex numbers is basically ready to go. And so then I put this out in at the end of I guess on here it's in at the end of April, but should be the end of March, I think. But anyway, I have to correct that. But so this is no longer the plan. Sorry for misleading everyone. So the current release plan is the next release of HDF5 will be 2.0.0. This would be a normal major release. That means, I mean, we're not going to try to antagonize everyone, but it'll just be a normal major release. So there will be some API changes and some other changes. And there will be no more releases of HDF5 114. We no longer maintain multiple release branches. It's a lot of work to keep all the branches in sync. So we don't do that anymore. So this is what the release schedule looks like now, right? So at the end of March, we have 2.0. Right now, this is the last version, 114.5 of 114, and we're currently working on HDF5 2.0. And then this over here, will that be 2.1? Will it be 3? I mean, I don't know, it depends. So that's what's right now on GitHub. If you want to go look at GitHub, that's current. So what will be in HDF5 2.0? So obviously the first thing is semantic versioning. And that is where 2 is the major version, 0 is the minor version, and then 0 is the patch version. And this is the thing that everybody's been asking us to do because our meaningless first number 1 is confusing to everybody who maintains a library. And we're a very commonly used library, so we should behave like everybody else. So that's the most important thing. We also do want to revisit some library defaults, cache sizes, things like that. Just the various library defaults that we have. Complex number support will be in. That's basically ready to go. We will update some less commonly used API calls, so there will be some things that are versioned. I put some examples on here to show you that these are oddball things that are not very, very commonly used, like register type with a hash size parameter that hasn't been used in like 15 years, 10, 15 years, long time. We switched from off-T to HD off-T and set external, so you can set external storage. And on Windows, off-T is the 32-bit type, and so people are complaining about that, so we fixed that. And then H5T decode takes in a buffer and no size, and so it's impossible for us to tell when we're running off the end of the buffer, and so there's CVE issues that potentially can touch that. So I do want to fix more OSS fuzz bugs and other crashers every time we release. I try to fix as many of those as we can with the resources we have available. Cloud optimized HDF5, we're constantly trying to improve that experience. So any issues that are in the read-only S3, VFD, command line tools, options, things like that, we try to get those in. What will not be in HDF5 2.0? So I reserve the right to change my mind on these, but I'm going to threaten to remove some stuff that is not well maintained and old and crufty, and some of which causes non-trivial support costs. One is the Autotools. I think we're at the point where we can remove the Autotools, and so I do want to drop one build system and just go to CMake. This causes me some pain because I'm an Autotools person, so I feel the collective sigh from everybody who would prefer that we keep the Autotools. I prefer the way that it's laid out. I don't prefer the way that it creates little shell scripts instead of actual programs you can run. But I think that maintaining 2 build systems is expensive, especially as you move into more complicated testing, and then you have to reinvent the wheel twice in ways that support both the Autotools and CMake. And we still have to this day some things that are not quite the same in both of those build systems. I do want to drop the GIF tools or GIF tools, whichever you prefer. they're not really heavily used. They're not well maintained. We never touch them, and they have open CVE issues that we fix them in quotes by telling people to just not build them. And so I don't want to clutter the library with a bunch of miscellaneous tools. We may move these to a different repo and have them buildable there, because they're mostly just ANSI C. They don't really need very much support, like library platform independent stuff. But yeah, as far as I can tell, they're holdovers from HDF4. So I do want to drop those. The C++ wrappers. So I'm threatening to do this. We'll see if people scream at me. They have not been actively supported for quite a while. They're based on C++ 98. They've been sort of updated to do C++ 11, sort of, not quite. I think there's still some issues out there to add some things. But there are header-only wrappers that exist that use modern C++, like High5, and we may just pull like the High5 wrappers into our CI and tell people to just go use those if they want a C++ wrapper. That's a much more modern C++ experience.
Those are good. I've used them recently and they're quite good. They
Yeah,
do everything you expect them to do in a very nice C++ way.
yeah, and I would like to push a lot of wrapper stuff out of the library. I think that that's worked well for things like Julia and H5 and things like that. Is like, let's let those things exist in their own ecosystems and not put support for that stuff in the library directly. And then we haven't supported 32-bit operating systems for quite some time, and it's difficult to find a 32-bit Linux distro. As far as I know, Debian is the only major one that still supports 32-bit. In Windows, you can only get a 32-bit version of the OS if you have a very special agreement with Microsoft. Last time I checked, anyway. You cannot, if you have MSDN, you can't just go download 32-bit binary, a 32-bit OS anymore. So even though I think it's useful for us to occasionally build with targeting like a 32-bit build, because then that can kind of suss out some of our, like if we have a bad assumption about how big types are supposed to be and stuff like that, we can be more explicit about it. But I do not want to go fix bugs on 32-bit operating systems that are only almost entirely unavailable now. So we have a few that are in GitHub, and I just want to close those. So as a reminder, and this is something that I want to highlight more to people, you can specify a particular file format version. You can specify a particular API, right? I put the CMake stuff up here, not the Autotools stuff that I'm more familiar with. So you can enable deprecate symbols and set a default API version. And so you can, if you want to have your application still pretend like it's using HDF5 110, but actually use HDF5 2.0 under the hood, you can do that. And one of the things that I do want to get out sometime in the next 6 months, I've been kicking this around for a while, but I think this is really important, is to get a migration guide out that explains in detail how to use those two features above, and also have a version by version guide, right? So if you're going from 1.8 to 110, to explain to people like these are the API calls that change. This is how you modify your software, and to do that for the main library, to do that for filter and VFD and full connector authors. I think that would be a really very, very handy document, because I think people are often, it's a journey of discovery when they find out that upgrading to the fanciest, newest version of HDF5 is going to require changes. And so explaining that, I think, is very important. So that's what I got. So if anybody wants to yell, now's the time. I got my notepad open here so I can write stuff down. I'll go back to the most controversial slide there, and then there we go.
I was going to say, possibly
Hmm?
consider whiteboard, taking Fortran and Java out too.
I've thought about doing that. Fortran, I think, requires kind of a lot of build system support. So maybe I've thought about, and I don't want the library to change and then have like Fortran and Java be in this constant stage of catch up. So, maybe we can add them as Git submodules. Like I find that when we've used Git submodules in the past, people just get more confused by them than anything.
Fortran has a lot of generated code, so it's very light now in the library in terms of source code. So I don't
Yeah.
see why you need to remove that.
The thing that I think is the most complicated about Fortran is that when it's trying to guess how big stuff is, it has to run some programs, and so I still think you can't cross compile for Fortran, and without making some assumptions that may be dangerous. So
But is that an argument to keep it in or take it out? I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's the direction that stuff has gone, and that may be a good idea is to pull that out and put that to the side.
Bring it up and give it some focus and stop making it kind of tag along. Well, all the advantages that we get from Julia and Python and bringing C++ out or whatever, right? Same advantages.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's reasonable to do it when there is something better available. Like, for example, high-level Fortran, modern Fortran that really, more object-oriented, whatever. But right now, I'm not aware of anything that provides full functionality and works as Fortran APIs. NetCDF had this experience, right? They pulled out Fortran APIs, and believe me, it's very inconvenient for the users. So I think you should talk to Fortran users first.
Yeah, what makes it inconvenient?
You have to go to 2 different repos. You have to have 2 different builds instead of pushing button or specifying build with Fortran. You really have to go through multiple steps to build Fortran application for NetCDF now.
What about, I understand. So maybe Dana, there's a meta project that allows them all to be independent, but if user really wants a one-click solution, they can download the meta project, which has everything as submodules, so we know it all compiles together. And the users who want C++ and Java and Fortran and Rust and Julia and whatever.
And how you test
Grab
it?
that.
And how you test it, Quincy? You have to then you're pushing. So let's define what problems you're trying to solve. With C++, problem is clear what you're solving. It's more modern APIs, and the same with Julia, and with Fortran or Java. Is there something better that you can rely on?
Well, there are more modern versions of Fortran that we could move up to, but I don't have
But
games.
not HDF5 APIs, right? So, and Python people, Julia people, they have their own established build systems, but it's not true for.
Yeah, Fortran doesn't really have like if you're going to get H5 and you want H5 it's really easy. You can just get that from the pip or whatever. Fortran, I feel like that's not as much the case. If the Java stuff, you could split that out and put that in like Maven, I guess. And one of the things that we would like to do with the Java wrappers is to use JExtract, which gives you a whole bunch of stuff basically for free. I mean, you still got to write some glue code from what I understand, but that may be a thing that is.
Yeah, that sounds like a good reason and time to take Java out is when that is working, take it out, And Fortran, until Fortran, quote unquote, dies, there's going to be new versions.
Never die. Fortran will be in use in 100 years from now.
Well, there's going to be new versions then, and at some point there will be some sensible. Oh yes, now is the time. Perhaps.
I mean, there's advantages in that the library can do its own thing, and we don't have to spend library developer time, worrying about things that are really like Fortran problems.
Yeah. I think one of the advantages I've seen is that when you bring it out as its own package, the people who are specialists in that language really lowers the barrier for them to get in there and do nice, convenient things for that language. That enables them to just mess around with Fortran instead of like, oh, there's this big thing going on underneath the covers. But sure.
To experts. Changes, that is true. Disadvantage is harder for some users. Note experience of net CDF. Okay.
There's a couple of other things I could think of that I would have personal, like, gosh, I wish I'd done this differently, but they don't have to go in 2.0, they could go in 3.0 to me, you know.
Like what?
Well, I think it was a poor idea to alias the offsets of things in files, typically containers, using h size t, aliased with the dimensions of data space things, which really probably should have gotten the HDIMT type. Because it would dramatically clarify the obviousness of those interfaces and what is this type for. But not a huge thing right now.
Yeah, we've talked about that in the past, and I would agree that that'd be a useful change to make. It's just that's something that people have the resources to do right now.
No, I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one that interferes a lot is the high level interfaces. The thread safety gaps and other complexity around them, they're not very well maintained. They could also go out in another package.
Yeah, those I would go first before Fortran.
Yeah.
And I would give some serious thought to sticking H5LS and H5 dump in a little arena and figuring out who walks out alive. Probably dump.
Yeah, it would be H5 dump.
Because having two mechanisms for doing basically the same thing has always been a drag.
They share a lot of code now. They have different interfaces. In terms of code, they share most of the code. So in terms of maintenance, you shouldn't worry about that. A lot of refactoring was done, which is really nice.
Well, that part's fine. I agree with you. The complexity is when I add a new user interface to dump, I end up thinking, gosh, I could add this dump thing to LS, and how does it look over there? And
yeah,
more work for new capabilities.
Don't add it. If you're removing one tool, then you'll.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we remove one tool, I don't even have to think.
You know, H5. Okay, I will not argue. Whatever.
Especially if you just do like alias, you know, H5 LS as like, you know, H5 dump with some options, right? Like, what's the reason to have that around anymore, right? If they're really that close, you know, it's really just an output option.
You see, there is a bigger problem with command line tools because initially they were designed to be like Unix tools that you can use pipelines of those tools. Now you have incompatible output, so you cannot ingest it in one tool or another. So they're completely separate. So it's better just to design new set of tools that will have clear, you know, purpose and clear interfaces and can be interoperable and not like current tools.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's
and
some bigger cleanup in the future.
more performant because there are many optimizations that are in one tool and maybe not in another, you know.
Yeah, those are all good things too.
Yeah.
Well, another thing is, I don't know if you guys thought about it, but it's really time, and I hope I will get funding for it, but really look at the file format and get rid of the idea that everything is reside in one file, right? Because file format, what it does, it really shows the dependencies between how things are put together, right? Where they reside, it's a different story. And now offset defines where you find the object in the file, but that offset can be anything else like URL or whatever. And this is time to start thinking how you reconsider it. You still will have container, but it can be distributed container with different methods of accessing data. It can be an object store, it can be in the file, it can be, I don't know where. Or just imagine where it can be. So this is where I would put effort, and not on effort of removing APIs, frankly speaking.
Yeah, I'm gonna start that soon.
Uh,
But that's not about this.
And of course, making
Yeah,
my
that's
3
way
months
too big.
credit. This is where we should focus.
Well, I mean, that's like what we did with like tokens, right? That's just extrapolate. It's kind of extending the same idea to
All right.
offset to this generic thing.
So right, but then a file format itself should be extended, right? Because it really describes a container and relationship between objects, which still stands for any storage and for any where data resides. It's simply interpretation of where you find those that we need to extend.
I would do it a different way, but it's still not this change.
Yeah, it's like way bigger than like right now we're just worried about like what can we do in basically 5 months that will go into HDF5 2.0. And it's like 5 months where there's holidays like right in the middle and supercomputing and stuff like that. So this like removing this stuff is easy, right? Like I can do this in a very enjoyable weekend. But stuff like this, right? Like revisiting library defaults, like that requires some meetings and some communication and stuff like that. We want to get that started as soon as possible. Complex is basically done. This is really just going in. Some of this stuff's already in develop. But this is pretty easy to do. This is like a week, a person can do this in a week. This is a continuous process. This is a continuous process. To me, those are kind of like the, and there's like some other stuff that I think is um, important to get fixed. Like we've got some, like our last compiler specific issues that we have that are pernicious are the DT or RIF bugs in NVHPC. And then there's also some like long-standing, long double IBM format stuff that I would like to get done just for completeness. Especially since the last time I talked to the open power people, they're very enthusiastic about helping me to fix those issues. So there's like a few other like things that are not on here because they're just kind of small one-off things.
Well,
I
I
will
also
be
think
really sad seeing Autotools gone. I know.
Me too in a way, but I also
Seeing all issues that CMake, you don't get any questions about Autotools, but CMake, it's all over the place.
well, okay, but that's the problem, right? Is that like the auto tools have not migrated to keep up with the times. Like right now, I'm at the point where I have to suppress warnings that the auto tools don't support Java anymore, right? So like, and they're really creaky, and yeah, they're they don't have a lot of bugs, so they don't do a lot, and they haven't changed very much at all in 15, 20 years. And yeah, CMake, yeah, I feel like you're jumping in the blender, right? Like there's constantly new changes and stuff like that. But we have to support CMake because the auto tools don't do multi-generator systems like Xcode and Visual Studio. They don't do Windows. So we have to pick CMake. So, at some point I'd like to rip the Band-Aid off and have one of the reasons I think that the auto tools have such good support on for HDF5 is that we have spent a lot of time loving those and making sure that they work well. Like, I mean, Quincy and I are both Autotools users, and there's been many times where we've gone through and just fixed a bunch of junk. And that's, we have one person who really does a lot of the CMake work. And if all the developers are instead focusing on improving, like scratching their itches in CMake, the CMake stuff will get better. And that is one of the things I'm
Agree
like
with that.
the future is, for example, we use a lot of macros in CMake, and if we switch those to functions, then that will have a lower cost because you can do more in a function, so we can consolidate a lot of the CMake code that's very cut and pasty right now. And that'll just, I think, make a lot of stuff easier.
And also, I was going to bring up, there's been a couple of developer interface bump arounds already in develop, so that'll show up in the 2.0. I don't know if you want to include it here, but
Well,
anything
sort of,
that's
right?
going on for developers.
Right now, they won't, because the 1.16 branch is going to turn into the 2.0 branch. So stuff that just because it's in develop doesn't mean it's going to be released as 2.0.
Sure. Okay. True. Do we want to bring it in though? Might as well.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to discuss. Like, I'll have to look at a delta of what's going to be 2.0 versus develop. I would
Okay.
say that if stuff isn't breaking, I'm not opposed to putting it in. I'd like to keep branches as close as possible.
Yeah, that's
Velocity is easier.
Yeah.
It's always hard supporting branches when they diverge. Like at 1.8, when it got towards the end, like moving anything to that branch was just a nightmare. Even trivial fixes.
Yeah, I would bring them in now so that anything that happens in that direction between now and 2.0's release could get included, and we wouldn't have people waiting for another 1 to 2 years to get magical things.
Yeah, I mean, we should. I'll pencil that in for not this coming working group meeting. I'll put that on the schedule for the one that's after that. We can talk about that then. But if there's anything that's in develop that needs to go to 2.0. I can like fire up meld and we can like look. Any other questions? Robert, Greg?
I have a pretty strong feeling that based on some development work I'm anticipating here, kind of in the direction that I was saying, let's take a really strong look at what a new file format would look like. The bundles and other things I mentioned at the HUG presentation. We'll want to update the vol connector interface at least, and the VFD interface to at least add a NIT over there. And we should go think about what we'd like in those developer-oriented things. I think the IO filters for compression stuff also needs a little bit of care and attention. So all the plugin stuff, yeah.
We don't have a lot of time, and there's like literally like a month plus of holidays and people generally being out for other stuff, month to 2 months. So we don't have a lot of time before 2.0 drops. And I don't want to put off having 2.0 for, waiting for others to get. But I would say this is that what I'm hoping is that by pulling some band-aids off and then having a migration guide, and being much more clear about kind of how one upgrades from different versions of the library, we should probably be more aggressive about bumping the major version. That it's okay if we're careful about making the migration path not impossible. That we should be trying to get more stuff in the library. And I feel like, I mean, we're at this time, right, where there's a lot of stuff out there that is not in the library that people care about, right? Stuff like whether it's multi-threading, whether it's alternative layouts that work better with things like object stores and stuff like that. GPUs. I feel like if we don't want to be your grandpappy's file format and storage system, we need to meet the needs of the users. And so, over the next couple of years, we should be okay with bumping the major version.
No, I think we will, and I agree. I would at least take on a volunteer for an enjoyable weekend of handing the init call to the VFDs. That's straightforward. So I'd like to have that one go in 2.0. It would simplify code.
We can do that. I mean, we've learned a lot of lessons from the vols, right? And so, you know, if we update the VFDs so that they can behave better like that, and especially like if they're going to be more adaptable to, you know, a world where multi-threading is a thing, then we should do that.
Yeah. If we could do the info to string ones, I'll consider those, but the info to string and string to info bits, they're really help to stack things. But I don't know if we want to completely go in that direction. Just a nip would be enough for a little bit.
But even like the two string stuff, I mean, we voice that on the most of the connectors, right? We don't prescribe like how it has to look. So
Oh no, I agree, but I just want to make certain that there isn't something else.
Are you guys talking about staking VFDs and walls and passing information? Talking about this?
well, the init stuff
Yeah.
is to kind of move some of the stuff out of where we do it now, right? Where there's like that public kind of private API call, which is not the greatest design.
You know, it will be good to have, if you can describe all these activities, why we're doing this, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's I really want to get that HEPS thing. I don't have time. It's really important, I think, to have a venue to discuss all this stuff where it's like exists in one spot and not like in RFCs scattered across the internet. I think that's really important. I have not had time to sit down and spend an entire week. I'd show people what my calendar looks like, and it looks like a wall of meetings tiles, right? So it's hard to find time, but it is really important. I want to get that out. I'm hoping to have it before SC. We'll see, but I think that's exactly where this sort of discussion goes, and that would give us. And if we get it out this fall, that's still plenty of time to discuss stuff for 2.0 and get stuff in the winter. Okay, I gotta bounce. I have another meeting in like five minutes. Thanks everybody for coming. And if you have thoughts and ideas about this, there is that what do you want to see in HDF5 2.0 thread. You can hassle me directly. You can come to the working group meetings, and we'll start documenting some of this stuff. At least in GitHub, we'll start listing what we want to put in HDF5 2.0, maybe like the wiki or something, so people can actively discuss it. So yeah, thanks for your input. Thanks for coming. I hope this isn't too confusing. I was changing horses kind of midstream, but I think it's good to get some of this stuff out there sooner rather than later.
All right. Thank you,
All right.
Dana.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.